Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Taisus Dibra Maschel Bishleim Leben Azai Mahalach Ka'im Medami. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we can see what Taisus is coming to explain. So in the Gemara, we presented a brisa in a case where a person carries from Rosh Yachid to Rosh Rabbim through a Carmelis. The Rabbanan say that he is Chayiv, and Ben Azai says that he's Pater. So the Gemara began by saying Bishleim Leben Azai Mahalach Ka'im Medami. We could understand why Ben Azai says that the person is Pater, since he holds that somebody who is walking, it's as if he's standing, and therefore comes out that the person carried from the Rosh Yachid to the Carmelis, and from the Carmelis to the Rosh Rabbim, and therefore he's Pater because a person is Pater for such a thing. So this is what Tosfos is going to be coming to explain. So let's see the general outline of Tosfos. In the Gemara we said that the opinion of Ben Azai makes sense since he holds Mahalach Ka'im Medami, and there's three parts to Tosfos. The first part is Tosfos is going to ask why it is that the Gemara says that Ben Azai makes sense because he holds Mahalach Ka'im Medami. We could explain Ben Azai in a much more simple and direct way. The second part of Tosfos is going to discuss, according to Ben Azai, how a person is chayiv for carrying Dalad Amis and Rosh Hashanah. If we say Mahalach Ka'im, then when he's carrying, he's Imid at every point. He never carried the full Dalad Amis. Rather, he carried a smaller portion at a time, and a person shouldn't be chayiv. So how a person will be chayiv for carrying Dalad Amis and Rosh Hashanah, according to Ben Azai. In the third part of Tosfos, he's going to point out that according to this, it'll come out that Rabbi Yechanan, according to the opinion of Ben Azai, we'll see that one of the teachings from Rabbi Yechanan from the previous daf don't agree with what Ben Azai says. So let's see Tosfos now in the flowchart form. So the Gemara said, Bishleim Ben Azai. Ben Azai's opinion makes sense that he says that the person is Pater because he holds Mahalach Ka'im Medami. So the first part of Tosfos is a question by the Ri, and he asks, why do we need this reason? Why do we need to say that Ben Azai makes sense? Because he holds Mahalach Ka'im Medami. There's a much more simple explanation. We could say Ben Azai makes sense because we don't find such a case that it's chayiv. We don't find that a person carried from Rosh Yachid to Rosh Rabbim through a Carmelis that it's chayiv. And that's how the Gemara Taka continues. Tosfos points out. The Gemara continues and says, Ben Azai makes sense, but the Rabbanan don't make sense since we don't find such a case. So it would have been much more simple and straightforward and sensible to say that Ben Azai makes sense to say Pater, since we don't find that such a case is ever chayiv. We don't find such a case in the Mishkan. Now Tosfos is going to support this question by negating a possible answer. And he says we cannot say, if you'll say it's because he agrees by Zerek, you'll say the Gemara needed to explain that Ben Azai holds Mahalach Ka'imid in order to explain how he holds that Zerek is chayiv, because Ben Azai holds that if a person walks from the Rosh Yachid to Rosh Rabbim through a Carmelis carrying something, he's Pater. However, if he throws the item, he'll be chayiv. So since we see that he says chayiv by Zerek, we need to explain that the reason by Mahalach he's Pater is because of Mahalach Ka'imid. Says Tosfos, we can't answer that because at this point in the Gemara, we didn't yet know that Ben Azai agrees that when somebody throws the item, he's going to be chayiv. How do we know that we don't know this yet? So Tosfos will prove what he just told us, that we don't know it yet. Because otherwise, we wouldn't just ask the question on the Rabbanan. We wouldn't just say, according to the Rabbanan, why is he chayiv? We don't find that such a case is chayiv. We'd also ask him Ben Azai. Why does Ben Azai say chayiv when he throws it? We don't find that such a case is chayiv. But we don't ask on Ben Azai because we don't yet know that Ben Azai says and agrees that when one throws it, he's going to be chayiv. So since we don't know that yet, we have our original question. So these two items are just supporting and proving what we're trying to say, which is our question. Why don't we just say in the Gemara, why didn't the Gemara just say Ben Azai makes sense to say Pater, since we don't find that such a case is chayiv? We don't find such a case in the Mishkan. And Tosfos presents the answer by the Ri, who says that the Gemara means to say that Ben Azai will make sense even if we were to find such a case in the Mishkan, since he holds Mahalach Ka'im Medami. So in other words, the Gemara over here is saying we could have said that Ben Azai makes sense because we don't find such a case in the Mishkan. But in a way, it's a better thing to say Ben Azai will make sense whether we don't find such a case in the Mishkan or whether we do find such a case in the Mishkan, since Ben Azai holds Mahalach Ka'im Medami. So Mahalach Ka'imid will address all possible things, because whether it isn't in the Mishkan or whether it is, Ben Azai can still rely on his opinion that Mahalach Ka'im Medami, that somebody who's walking, it's as if he's standing. So that's the first part of Tosfos, explaining why the Gemara said that Ben Azai makes sense based on his opinion of Mahalach Ka'im Medami, and not based on saying, since we don't find such a case in the Mishkan. Now we'll move on to the second part of Tosfos, which discusses how a person is chayiv for carrying Dalad Amis and Rosh Rabbim according to Ben Azai. So Tosfos begins by presenting a Yerushalmi that asks this question: according to Ben Azai, how is a person chayiv? In which way is a person chayiv for carrying Dalad Amis and Rosh Rabbim if at each point in his walking it's considered that he came to rest, and if he came to rest, he didn't carry the full 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah. And Tosfos says that the Yerushalmi over there answers that we find the case that a person is chayiv for carrying Daled Amas in Rosh Hashanah if he jumps the full Daled Amas. So it comes out that according to the Yerushalmi, Ben Azai will hold that if a person carries Daled Amas in Rosh Hashanah, he won't be chayiv, since it's the same as if he stopped at every point. And a person who stops, he separates and breaks the carrying into different parts. He doesn't have the full 4 amas, and he'll only be chayiv if he jumps 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah. However, Tosfos says that the Bavli, our Gemara, doesn't agree with this. Our Gemara simply holds that one is chayiv because it's Allah L'Meishim Sinai. Therefore, we don't have the question. In our Gemara, we don't ask on a Ben Azai's opinion how would it be chayiv for carrying 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah. Because our Gemara holds that Ben Azai will agree that a person is chayiv every case of carrying 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah, since it's Allah L'Meishim Sinai. So here Tosfos presents that Ben Azai holding Mahalach Ka'imedami creates a question how a person is chayiv for carrying Daled Amas and Rosh Hashanah. He presents the opinion of the Yerushalmi that a person will only be chayiv if he jumps Daled Amas, and the opinion of the Bavli that a person will be chayiv in every case. Now we're going to go to a side discussion. As a result of this, we're going to begin by bringing up the opinion of Rabbi Akiva that Kluta Kimisha Hunchadam. It says Tosfos that we're going to say the same thing in the Bavli according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says Kluta Kimisha Hunchadam. So what happens when a person throws an item 4 amas and Rosh Hashanah? We need to say the same thing, that since it's Halacha L'Meishim Sinai, we're not going to end up saying Kluta Kimisha Hunchadam at every point, and it didn't travel the full 4 amas and Rosh Hashanah. Rather, he will be chayiv because it's Halacha L'Meishim Sinai. Tosfos now continues and presents a question that the Riva has. Riva has a doubt. Since we don't say Mahalach Ka'imid by Daled Amas and Rosh Hashanah, there's many ways of explaining the 2 points, the 2 questions that Riva has. We're going to explain it in a very simple way. He says, since we don't say Mahalach Ka'imid by Daled Amas and Rosh Hashanah, there's a question. What happens if somebody actually stops when walking the Daled Amas? Is he also then going to be chayiv or not? And the simple way of understanding it is, do we say that Mahalach remains Ka'imid? And even though it's Mahalach Ka'imid, it's as if he's standing, still he's chayiv, so if he actually stands, he's also chayiv? Or do we say that specifically Mahalach Ka'imid is not paid attention to? However, if he actually stands, then we will pay attention to that and consider it as if he didn't walk the full 4 amas. So that's one question that he has, that if we say Mahalach Ka'imid, that Ben Azai holds Mahalach Ka'imid, and still walking Daled Amas and Rosh Hashanah is chayiv, how do we look at those 2 things interacting? Do we say that we simply don't say Mahalach Ka'imid, or that we do say Mahalach Ka'imid, but that we don't pay attention to it? However, if he actually stands, then it will be a problem. Or do we say it's Mahalach Ka'imid and it's considered that he stood, and we still don't pay attention to it, and the same is true if he actually stood? That's one question Riva presents. And the second question is, what happens if a person walked the full 4 amas, and then afterwards he didn't do a proper hanacha? Tosfos explains how that could be, but he didn't do a proper hanacha. But he continued walking, let's say, a total of 6 amas, and then he didn't do a proper hanacha. Do we say Mahalach Ka'imid comes into effect after the Daled Amas, and therefore he completed the Malacha? Or do we say, since we didn't implement Mahalach Ka'imid within the Daled Amas, it doesn't either take effect after the Daled Amas? So those are questions that Riva has, and Tosfos explains that the same could be asked according to Rabbi Akiva, who says Kluta Kamisha Hunchadamyo. What happens if a person threw an item, let's use that example again, of 6 amas and Rosh Hashanah, and it didn't have a proper Anacha? So we didn't say that Kluta Kamisha Huncha affected that it should be at rest throughout the 4 amas. However, does it work at the end of the 4 amas to consider it at rest and he completed the malacha? Or do we say it doesn't take effect at all, not within the 4 amas, not outside of the 4 amas, and he needs a proper anacha, and if he didn't have one, he'll be pater? So here we just have a side discussion. After we spoke about Daled Amas and Rosh Hashanah, according to Ben Azai, we spoke about how it would work with Rabbi Akiva, and we also spoke about how it works. How does it interact together with saying Ben Azai holds Mahalach Ka'imid and still he's chayiv? How do those 2 things work together? And now the third and final part of Tosfos, he points out that it seems to the Rashba that the case of Rabbi Yechanan, where a person is mefana chafotzav mizavis lezavis. Rabbi Yechanan taught that if a person carries items from one corner of his house to another corner of his house, and while he's carrying it to the second corner, he decides he's going to take it out to the Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Yechanan taught that he's pater. And the reason is because when he did the original Akira, it wasn't with the kavana, with the intent to do a malacha. He was going to do something which is mutter, carry it to a different corner. And it's necessary for the person to have kavana to do a malacha at the time of the Akira. Says Tosfos, it seems that this teaching of Rabbi Yechanan does not agree with what Ben Azai says. Because according to Ben Azai, the person would be chayiv. Since although when he picked it up, originally that Akira was to do something that's mutter, nevertheless, when he changed his mind and decided to carry it out, we say Mahalach Ka'imid. It's as if he's standing. And now he has in mind, when he does the next Akira, to do a malacha, so he would be chayiv. And Tosfos says this is actually clearly proven in the Masechtas Ksubis in Perek Elin Iris. So here we could see, let's just see how the flowchart helps in understanding the Tosfos. We presented what the Gemara said, that we could understand the opinion of Ben Azai since he holds Mahalach Ka'imid. That's why a person's putter when he carries from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah through a Carmelis. And Tosfos discusses three things on this part of the Gemara. Number one, why does the Gemara say that Ben Azai is understood based on Mahalach Ka'imid? We could explain it based on something more simple and straightforward. The second part is that Tosfos discusses, according to Ben Azai, who holds Mahalach Ka'imid, how and when will a person be chayiv for carrying Dalad Amos and Rosh Hashanah? And the third part of Tosfos is pointing out that an earlier teaching from Rabbi Yechanan will clearly not agree with this, that Ben Azai holds that Mahalach Ka'imid.